You have filled in the forms, gathered the documents, and clicked submit, and then comes the quiet part, the wait, while somewhere your application is being assessed. For many owners, this stage is a black box. They know a decision will come, but not what is actually being weighed, or why one application succeeds while another is sent back. In the next few minutes, we are going to open that box in plain English and walk through how grant applications are generally reviewed, from the first checks that your submission is complete and eligible, to the deeper questions about the project's merit, its value for money, and the outcomes it promises, and finally how all of that comes together into a decision. One important note before we begin. This channel is educational only. We are not a government agency. We are not affiliated with or endorsed by Go Business Enterprise Singapore or any government body, and nothing here is official advice. The exact assessment process differs from scheme to scheme and changes over time. So we will keep to the big picture and always point you back to the official source, gobusiness.gov.sg, and to the guidance for your specific scheme to confirm how your application will actually be assessed before you rely on any of it. U happens after you submit. It helps to start with a simple shift in perspective. From your side, submitting feels like the end of the effort. But from the agency's side, it is the beginning of a review, a structured process of deciding whether to commit public money to your project. That review is not a coin toss or a matter of luck. It follows a logic, moving from basic checks that your application even qualifies to consider through to a judgment about whether the project is worth supporting. Understanding that logic is genuinely useful, not because you can game it, but because it helps you submit an application that answers the questions an assessor is actually asking. When you know what someone is looking for, you can make it easy for them to say yes, and much of a strong application is simply that, making the reviewer's job straightforward. First, a completeness check. The earliest stage is usually the most mundane and the most avoidable to fail, a check that your application is actually complete. Before anyone judges the substance of your project, someone or something confirms that the required fields are filled, the necessary documents are attached, and the submission is in order. It sounds trivial, but incomplete applications are one of the most common reasons for delay and frustration, because a missing document can stall everything before the real assessment even begins. Think of it as the gate you have to pass through before the interesting part starts. The practical takeaway is to treat completeness as seriously as content. Follow the checklist exactly, attach everything asked for, and give your application a careful final review so that it sails through this first stage rather than bouncing back to you over something small. Then, an eligibility check. Once an application is complete, the next question is whether it is eligible, whether you and your project actually fit what the scheme is for. Every grant exists for a defined purpose and a defined group, and part of assessment is simply confirming that your business and your project fall inside those boundaries. If a scheme is meant for a certain kind of activity and your project is something else, no amount of merit later will rescue it because it was never a fit to begin with. This is why reading the eligibility guidance before you apply matters so much. It saves you from investing effort in a scheme that was never going to apply to you. We are keeping the specifics out of this because who and what qualifies differs by scheme and changes over time. So the eligibility criteria on the official source are the ones that decide, not any general description. Judging the project's merit past the basic gates, assessment turns to the substance. And the first substantive question is usually merit. Is this a worthwhile project? Here, an assessor is trying to understand what you actually intend to do, whether it makes sense, and whether it is likely to work. A clear, well-thought-through project that plainly addresses a real need tends to read very differently from a vague one that seems assembled to fit the grant. This is where the quality of your thinking shows, not the polish of your writing, but whether the project has a coherent purpose, a sensible plan, and a genuine reason to exist beyond the funding. The lesson for applicants is to be clear and honest about what you are doing and why, because an assessor rewarding merit is really rewarding a project that has been thought through. So do that thinking before you write, not while you write. Value for money. Alongside merit sits the question of value for money, whether the support being requested is reasonable for what the project will deliver. Because grants use public funds, assessors have a duty to consider whether the spending is sensible and proportionate, not whether it is the cheapest option, but whether the cost makes sense for the outcome. A project that asks for a lot while promising little is a harder case to approve than one where the investment and the expected return are clearly in proportion. You do not need to make everything as small as possible, you need to make it make sense to show that what you are asking for is justified by what the project will achieve. Framing your project so the relationship between cost and benefit is easy to see is one of the more useful things you can do because it answers a question the assessor is required to ask. The outcomes you promise closely tied to value is the question of outcomes. What will actually be different if this project goes ahead? Assessors are interested in results, the tangible change the project is expected to produce, whether that is improved productivity, new capability, growth, or another concrete benefit. An application that clearly states the outcomes it expects and connects them logically to the activities it proposes is easier to assess and easier to believe than one that is vague about what success looks like. This is not about promising the world. In fact, overclaiming can undermine you. It is about being clear and realistic about the difference the project will make. So when you describe your project, spell out the outcomes you are aiming for and how the work leads to them. Because a project with a believable payoff is exactly what public support is meant to back. How a decision comes together, all of these threads, completeness, eligibility, merit, value, and outcomes come together into a decision, and it helps to picture how, rather than a single yes or no on one factor, assessment tends to be a rounded judgment, weighing whether the project fits, whether it is sound, whether the support is justified, and whether the expected results make it worthwhile. Different schemes weight these considerations differently, and some involve panels, scoring, or several people, but the underlying idea is consistent, a decision that the project is a reasonable use of public support. Sometimes the answer is a clear yes or no, and sometimes an assessor comes back with questions or asks for more information before deciding, which is a normal part of the process rather than a bad sign. The outcome reflects the whole picture, so a strong application is one that quietly satisfies every part of it. Mitanis, assessment is not a timeline. It is worth drawing one clear line here because the two get confused. Assessment is about what is being judged. The timeline is about how long the judging takes, and they are different things. Knowing that reviewers look at completeness, eligibility, merit, value, and outcomes tells you nothing about how many weeks a decision will take, and how long a decision takes tells you nothing about whether it will be yes. In this video, we are deliberately focused on the what, the substance and assessor ways, not the when. How long any particular scheme takes to decide varies and changes over time. So if timing is your question, the official channels for your scheme are the place to look. For now, the useful thing is to understand what a good outcome depends on, so that whenever the decision comes, your application gave it every reason to be a yes. Applying with assessment in mind. Put all of this together and it changes how you approach an application. If you know an assessor will check that you are complete, confirm that you are eligible, judge whether the project has merit, weigh its value for money, and look for clear outcomes, then you can build an application that answers each of those in turn. Submit something complete so it clears the first gate. Apply only where you genuinely fit, so eligibility is not a problem. Explain your project clearly so its merit is obvious. Keep your request proportionate so the value is easy to see. And state realistic outcomes so the payoff is believable. None of that is about tricks. It is about understanding what is being asked and answering it honestly, which is exactly what turns a nervous submission into a confident one. A closing thought. So here is the picture to carry away. When you submit a grant application, it does not vanish into luck. It enters a review that generally moves from checking your submission is complete and eligible to judging the project's merit, its value for money, and the outcomes it promises, before all of that comes together into a decision. Understanding that process will not guarantee an approval, but it lets you apply with clear eyes, answering the questions an assessor is actually asking. Remember that everything here is general and educational. We are not a government agency and we are not affiliated with or endorsed by anyone. and the exact assessment process differs by scheme and changes over time. So before you rely on anything, check how your specific scheme is assessed on gobusiness.gov.sg and in its own guidance. If this took some of the mystery out of what happens after you submit, subscribe for more plain English Singapore grant explainers, and we will keep opening up the process one stage at a time.